It was a bright and sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made the park come alive. Birds chirped from the trees, a light breeze rustled the leaves, and children's laughter filled the air. Families sat on picnic blankets, couples walked hand in hand, and kids ran across the grass, chasing one another in playful excitement. Among them was Mia, a little girl with a bright smile and curious eyes. She sat in her wheelchair, her small hands gripping the wheels as she moved along the paved path with careful determination. Her mother, Vanessa, walked beside her, watching with a mixture of love and protectiveness. It had taken time for Mia to build her confidence, to feel comfortable exploring on her own, even if it was just rolling a few feet ahead. But today, she was happy, enjoying the simple joy of being outside. Mia loved the park. She loved the sight of ducks gliding over the pond, the sound of the swings creaking as kids flew high into the air, and the way the sun felt warm against her skin. It was a place where she didn't have to think about hospital visits or doctor checkups. Here she was just another kid enjoying the world around her. "Look, Mommy, the ducks are coming closer," she exclaimed, pointing toward the water. Vanessa smiled. "Do you want to feed them?" Mia nodded eagerly. Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out a small bag of birdseed. She handed it to Mia, who took a handful and tossed it onto the grass near the pond's edge. The ducks quickly waddled over, pecking at the tiny pieces, making Mia giggle. She clapped her hands, delighted by the way the birds eagerly ate their treat. A few other children came closer, watching the ducks as well. One little boy, around Mia's age, smiled at her. "Can I try?" he asked, pointing to the bag of birdseed. Mia happily nodded, holding out the bag so he could take some. Together, they tossed more food to the ducks, laughing when the birds flapped their wings excitedly. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Vanessa sat on a nearby bench, letting Mia enjoy herself. She loved seeing her daughter happy. The world wasn't always kind to children like Mia, but in moments like these, she saw her daughter's strength and joy shining through. As Mia continued playing, Vanessa noticed two police officers walking through the park. They seemed to be scanning the area, looking around as if searching for something. She thought nothing of it at first. Officers often patrolled public places, but then something about the way they looked toward Mia made her uneasy. They exchanged glances, whispering to each other before slowly making their way toward them. Vanessa's heart tightened. She didn't know why, but something about their approach didn't feel right. Mia, unaware of the tension growing in her mother's chest, continued to laugh, tossing another handful of birdseed to the ducks. She had no idea that her peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. Vanessa kept her eyes on the two officers as they walked through the park. At first, she thought they were just doing their usual patrol, but something about the way they moved felt different. They weren't just looking around casually. They seemed focused, scanning the people in the park as if they were searching for someone specific. Then one of them, a tall man with a serious face, nudged his partner and nodded in Mia's direction. The other officer, slightly older with a rough look, narrowed his eyes and whispered something back. A moment later, they both started walking toward Mia and Vanessa, their expressions unreadable. Vanessa felt a small wave of uneasiness rise in her chest. She wasn't sure why. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just here, like everyone else, enjoying the day. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe the officers were just going to say hello, or maybe they were checking something in the park. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the feeling that something wasn't right. Mia, still happily tossing birdseed to the ducks, hadn't noticed them yet. Her laughter was light and carefree as she watched the ducks waddle around, flapping their wings excitedly. A few other children had joined in, taking turns tossing food while their parents watched from nearby benches. It was a peaceful, happy moment. Then the officers stopped right in front of Mia. Vanessa stood up quickly, her protective instincts kicking in. She didn't like how close they were standing. "Excuse me, Mom," the taller officer said, looking down at her. His voice was firm, his tone not exactly unfriendly, but not warm either. "We need to ask you a few questions." Vanessa frowned, confused. "Questions? About what?" The older officer glanced at Mia, then back at Vanessa. "We've had some reports about loitering in this area," he said. "Just doing our job, checking things out." Vanessa's confusion grew. "Loitering? We're just here in the park like everyone else." She gestured around at the other families sitting on benches, walking and playing. "My daughter was just feeding the ducks." Mia, now sensing that something was off, looked up at the officers with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, what's wrong?" she asked softly. The older officer's gaze shifted to Mia's wheelchair. "Is she supposed to be alone like this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Kids her age should be supervised at all times." Vanessa's stomach tightened. "She's not alone," she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I'm right here." The younger officer crossed his arms. "We just need to verify a few things. Do you have identification on you?" Vanessa blinked. "ID? Why would I need to show ID to be in a public park?" The officers exchanged another look. The older one's lips pressed together as if he didn't like being questioned. "It's just a routine check, Mom," he said. "Nothing to worry about. If everything's fine, we'll be on our way." Vanessa's heart pounded. She could feel people around them starting to watch. A woman sitting on a bench glanced over, then quickly looked away. A man walking by slowed down just a little as if he was trying to listen. Mia looked up at her mother, confused and a little nervous. "Mommy, I don't understand," she whispered. Vanessa knelt down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. Then she looked up at the officers again, her voice steady. "I'd like to know exactly why we're being questioned. We haven't done anything wrong." The taller officer exhaled, clearly losing patience. "Look, ma'am, we don't want any trouble," he said, his tone sharper now. "If you'll just cooperate, this will go much faster." Vanessa knew she had a choice. She could hand over her ID and hope they would leave them alone, or she could stand her ground. She tightened her grip on Mia's wheelchair and took a deep breath. She didn't like how this was unfolding. She didn't like the way they were looking at her and her daughter, as if they didn't belong. And she had a strange feeling that this wasn't going to be over anytime soon. Vanessa could feel her heart beating faster, but she refused to let her emotions take over. She had done nothing wrong. Her daughter had done nothing wrong. There was no reason for them to be treated like this. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking again. "Officers," she said firmly but respectfully, "I don't understand why you need my ID. We're just here like everyone else. My daughter was feeding the ducks, and I was sitting right there." She pointed toward the bench where she had been just moments ago. The taller officer sighed and glanced at his partner before looking back at her. "Look, ma'am, it's a simple request. Just show us your ID, and we'll be on our way." Vanessa wasn't convinced. She had seen enough stories about people being questioned for no real reason. The way these officers were speaking to her, as if she needed to prove she had a right to be in the park, made her uneasy. Mia's small voice broke the tension. "Mommy, am I in trouble?" she asked, her big eyes looking up at Vanessa. Vanessa's heart ached at her daughter's words. Mia was just a little girl. She shouldn't have to feel scared just because two officers had decided to question them for no reason. "No, sweetheart," Vanessa said gently, brushing a strand of hair from Mia's face. "You haven't done anything wrong." Then she turned her attention back to the officers. "Please, can you tell me exactly what this is about? Are we breaking any rules?" The older officer let out a short, impatient breath. "Like I said, ma'am, we're responding to reports of loitering. Some people come to public places and cause disturbances. We have to check." Vanessa frowned. "A disturbance? We were sitting quietly, feeding ducks. My daughter is in a wheelchair. How exactly does that look like a disturbance?" The officers exchanged another look. The younger one cleared his throat and shifted his stance, It was clear he wasn't expecting her to push back this much. Maya looked between her mother and the officers, her little hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she could tell that something was wrong. Then something happened that made Vanessa's frustration grow. The older officer crouched slightly and looked directly at Mia. His voice was softer now, almost too sweet. "Hey there, kiddo," he said. "Are you sure everything's okay? Do you need any help?" Mia blinked, confused. "Help with what?" she asked. The officer glanced at Vanessa briefly before looking back at Mia. "Just making sure. Sometimes kids need help, and we want to make sure you're safe." Vanessa's eyes widened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Were they implying that Mia wasn't safe with her? That she wasn't taking care of her daughter properly? She stood up straighter, her voice sharp now. "Excuse me, but my daughter doesn't need help from anyone but me. I take care of her just fine. If you have any real concerns, say them now, or let us enjoy our day in peace." The officers didn't answer immediately. Instead, they both studied her, as if deciding what to do next. Vanessa could feel people nearby watching, though no one stepped in. Mia, now clearly uncomfortable, reached for her mother's hand. "Mommy, can we go home?" she whispered. Vanessa squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Not yet, sweetheart." She wasn't going to let them scare her into leaving. She had done nothing wrong. But she had no idea that someone else in the park had been watching everything closely and recording it. Vanessa could feel her patience wearing thin, but she kept her emotions in check. She knew that reacting angrily would only make things worse. The two officers stood in front of her and Mia, their expressions unreadable, as if they were waiting for her to do something wrong. Mia, still holding her mother's hand, was quiet now. Her earlier excitement about feeding the ducks had disappeared. Vanessa could feel her daughter's fingers gripping tightly, a silent sign that she was scared. The older officer finally spoke again. "Ma'am, we're just trying to make sure everything is okay. We have the right to ask questions." Vanessa met his gaze. "And I have the right to ask why. I've been respectful. I've answered your questions. And I've told you we're just here to enjoy the park like everyone else. So unless there's a real reason you're questioning us, I'd like to get back to our day." The officer's jaw tightened slightly. It was clear he didn't like being challenged. He looked at Mia again, his voice calm but firm. "Young lady, do you feel safe?" Mia's eyes widened. "Safe from what?" she asked, genuinely confused. The officer tilted his head. "Are you being treated well? Do you feel like you need help?" Vanessa felt anger bubbling up inside her, but she took a deep breath before responding. "You're asking my daughter if she feels safe with me? My own child? This is getting ridiculous." Mia turned toward her mother, looking unsure of what to say. She had never been questioned like this before, and she didn't understand why the officers were acting like something was wrong when nothing was. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around and noticed that a few people had started paying attention to their conversation. A man sitting on a nearby bench had put his phone down, watching carefully. A woman pushing a stroller had slowed her pace, her eyes flicking between Vanessa and the officers. Vanessa saw them too, and she knew she wasn't imagining the tension in the air. People were noticing. The older officer, however, seemed unfazed. He sighed and crossed his arms. "Ma'am, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. If you just cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" Vanessa interrupted. "You haven't told me what we've done wrong. You're treating us like we're under investigation when all we did was come to the park." The officer's face hardened. "We're allowed to ask questions when we think it's necessary." Vanessa shook her head, frustration building. "Necessary? Necessary for what? My daughter is a little girl in a wheelchair feeding ducks. How is that a problem?" Mia tugged on Vanessa's sleeve. "Mommy, can we please go home now?" Her voice was small, and Vanessa could tell she was close to tears. The younger officer shifted on his feet again, glancing at his partner. He looked unsure now, as if he was beginning to realize that this situation wasn't going the way he expected. But before either of them could say another word, a voice called out from a few feet away. "Excuse me, officers." Everyone turned to see a man standing a short distance away, holding up his phone. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression calm but serious. "I've been recording everything," the man said, stepping closer. "And I think you both should explain exactly why you're questioning this mother and her child." The officers' faces changed instantly. The older one's confidence wavered for the first time. The younger one shifted again, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Vanessa didn't know who the man was, but in that moment she felt a wave of relief. Someone had seen what was happening, and someone had stepped in. The situation had just taken a turn, and now the officers were the ones under scrutiny. The park had been filled with laughter and calm moments just a short while ago, but now the atmosphere had changed. People were starting to pay attention. Some looked curious, while others frowned, sensing that something wasn't right. The man in the suit lowered his phone slightly but kept the screen facing the officers. His voice remained calm, but there was a sharpness in his tone. "I've been watching for the last few minutes. This woman and her child were sitting peacefully, feeding ducks. But you two have been pressing them with questions as if they've committed a crime. So I'll ask again, what exactly is the problem here?" The older officer's jaw clenched. His confidence, which had seemed unshakable earlier, wavered slightly under the man's direct gaze. He straightened his shoulders and cleared his throat. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." The man in the suit raised an eyebrow. "It does now, because you're in a public place, questioning a mother and her disabled daughter without any clear reason. And I have every right to record this." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around. He could see more people watching now. A woman with a stroller had stopped completely. A jogger had taken out his earbuds and was listening. Even the man on the bench, who had been casually watching earlier, was now holding up his phone too, quietly recording. Vanessa, still holding Mia's hand, felt her confidence return. She looked at the man in the suit, grateful but still cautious. She didn't know who he was, but he was standing up for them. Mia, sensing the change in the situation, whispered, "Mommy, who is he?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Vanessa whispered back. "But I think he's helping us." The older officer took a slow breath and turned to the man. "We are responding to a report," he said, choosing his words carefully. "We were informed about possible loitering and disturbances in the area." The man in the suit smirked slightly, shaking his head. "A disturbance. Feeding ducks is now a disturbance." He let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Sounds to me like you were looking for a reason to question them." The younger officer looked at his partner, clearly unsure about how to proceed. He had started to realize that this situation was no longer in their control. The older officer, however, wasn't backing down. "We were doing our job," he said firmly. "It's standard procedure." The man in the suit's expression grew serious. "Standard procedure. To question a mother and her disabled child for sitting in a park." He gestured around. "I see plenty of other people here. Why didn't you question them? Why did you come straight to this little girl and her mother?" The silence that followed was heavy. The older officer's lips pressed together, his face tense. The younger officer looked away, shifting his feet. Vanessa finally spoke up, her voice strong. "That's what I'd like to know too." Mia, still holding her mother's hand, looked at the officers with big, confused eyes. "Can we go now?" she asked softly. The man in the suit looked at the officers expectantly, as if daring them to say no. The older officer exhaled sharply, realizing there was no way to continue without making things worse. "You're free to go," he said stiffly. Vanessa didn't move at first. She had expected them to push harder, to keep pressing her for answers. But now, with so many eyes on them, and the camera still recording, they had no choice but to back off. The younger officer mumbled, "Let's go," to his partner, and without another word, they turned and walked away. As soon as they left, the tension in the air seemed to lift. Conversation slowly started again, but the people who had been watching still glanced at Vanessa and Mia with looks of concern and curiosity. Vanessa knelt beside Mia, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." The man in the suit stepped forward, offering a warm smile. "Are you both all right?" Vanessa nodded, still shaken but grateful. "Yes. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." The man slipped his phone into his pocket. "I couldn't just stand by and watch. What they did wasn't right." Vanessa took a deep breath and looked around. The moment had passed, but she knew she wouldn't forget it. And neither would the officers who had just walked away, because they had no idea that the man who had recorded everything wasn't just anyone. The truth was about to come out, and soon the world would know exactly what had happened in that park. Vanessa took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. The officers were gone, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered in the air. She turned to the man in the suit who had stepped in to help. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't spoken up." The man smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should do in a situation like this." Vanessa glanced at Mia, who was still holding her hand tightly. Her daughter had been so excited to come to the park, but now the joy had been taken away. Maya looked up at the man curiously. "Who are you?" she asked in her soft voice. The man knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "My name is Daniel," he said, "and I just wanted to make sure you and your mom were okay." Mia tilted her head. "Why were you recording?" Daniel chuckled. "Because sometimes, when things aren't fair, people need to see the truth." He glanced around at the crowd, where a few people were still watching. "And now, there's proof of what happened." Vanessa suddenly realized what he meant. "Wait," she said, looking at him carefully. "What are you going to do with that video?" Daniel's expression turned serious. "I plan to share it. People need to know that things like this happen, even in broad daylight, in public places." Vanessa felt a mixture of emotions: relief, gratitude, and worry. "I don't want any trouble," she admitted. "I just want to live peacefully with my daughter." Daniel nodded. "I understand. But if no one speaks up, this will keep happening to others." Before Vanessa could respond, another voice interrupted. "Excuse me," a woman said, stepping closer. She had been one of the bystanders watching the situation unfold. "I saw everything too, and I recorded it." She held up her phone. "If you need more proof, I can send you my video." Vanessa blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to get involved. A man in jogging gear also stepped forward. "I recorded too," he said. "Those officers had no reason to question you like that." One by one, more people spoke up. "I was just walking by, but I could tell something wasn't right. They were pressuring you for no reason. That's not okay. You and your daughter did nothing wrong." Vanessa was overwhelmed. She had felt so alone when the officers were questioning her, but now she realized that people had been paying attention. People had cared. Daniel smiled. "See, the truth is powerful." Mia, still holding onto her mother, looked up at her. "Mommy, does this mean we're safe?" Vanessa squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Yes, baby, we're safe." Daniel pulled out his phone again. "I think it's time for the world to see what really happened here." Vanessa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "If it helps make things better for others, then okay." As Daniel uploaded the video, Vanessa took a deep breath. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. And soon, the officers who had tried to intimidate her and her daughter would realize they had made a big mistake. Daniel's fingers moved quickly as he uploaded the video to his social media account. He added a simple caption: "A mother and her disabled daughter were harassed in the park for no reason. This is unacceptable. The world needs to see this." Within minutes, the video started gaining attention. People began sharing it, commenting, and asking questions. Some were outraged, demanding answers. Others couldn't believe what they were seeing. Vanessa didn't fully understand how powerful the internet could be, but she was about to find out. Mia, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at her. "Mommy, what's going to happen now?" Vanessa took a deep breath. "I don't know, sweetheart. But no matter what, we're going to be okay." Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "That was fast," he muttered. Vanessa frowned. "What happened?" Daniel turned the phone toward her. "A news reporter just messaged me. They want to talk about what happened." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Already?" Daniel nodded. "People are paying attention. They want to know why those officers acted that way." As they stood there, more people in the park checked their phones. A woman gasped. "Oh my gosh, this video is everywhere," she said. "I just saw it on another account too." The jogger who had recorded earlier showed his screen. "Look, a journalist just posted about it." Vanessa felt a wave of emotions, shock, nervousness, and something she hadn't felt before: power. For once, she wasn't the one being ignored. People were listening. People cared. Then, something unexpected happened. The two officers who had questioned her earlier were walking back toward the park entrance. But this time, they weren't alone. A man in a dark uniform, with a badge that looked different from the others, was walking beside them. His expression was serious. He was clearly in charge. Vanessa's heart pounded. "Who is that?" she whispered to Daniel. Daniel studied the man for a moment. "That's their superior. Someone must have alerted the department already." The lead officer stopped a few feet away and looked at Vanessa, Daniel, and the growing crowd. He wasn't like the other two. His posture was professional, his face unreadable. He turned to the officers and said something quietly. The older officer, the one who had questioned Vanessa the most, looked stiff. The younger officer shifted nervously. Then the superior officer stepped forward. His voice was calm, but firm. "Ma'am, I'd like to apologize for what happened today." Vanessa blinked, not expecting that. "Apologize?" He nodded. "I've seen the video, and I understand why people are upset. This situation was not handled correctly." The older officer opened his mouth as if to protest, but the superior gave him a sharp look, silencing him. Daniel folded his arms. "And what happens next?" he asked. "An apology isn't enough." The officer met his gaze. "There will be an investigation. Actions have consequences." Mia, still holding her mother's hand, asked softly, "Are they in trouble?" The officer looked at her gently. "There will be a review of their actions, yes." Vanessa finally spoke, her voice steady. "I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The officer nodded. "I understand." The crowd murmured in approval. People were watching. This time, Vanessa and Mia weren't alone. Daniel looked at Vanessa. "This isn't over yet, but today you stood your ground, and people heard you." Vanessa squeezed Mia's hand. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Vanessa stood quietly, holding Mia's hand as she processed everything. Just a short while ago, she had felt helpless while being questioned unfairly by the officers. But now things had changed. People had stood up for her. The truth had spread, and even the police department had been forced to take notice. Daniel kept checking his phone. The video is still spreading. More reporters are reaching out. People are demanding action. He looked at Vanessa. "Are you ready for this?" She took a deep breath. "I don't know. I never wanted attention. I just wanted a normal day at the park with my daughter." Mia tugged at her hand. "Mommy, does this mean they won't bother us again?" Vanessa knelt down and stroked Mia's hair. "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do." Just then, another woman stepped forward. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed in business clothes, and held a professional-looking notebook. "Excuse me," she said, giving Vanessa a kind smile. "My name is Lisa Carter. I'm a journalist. Would you be willing to share your side of the story? Vanessa hesitated. I don't know. Lisa nodded in understanding. I completely respect that. But this video is already making headlines. If you don't share your side, others will try to tell it for you. Daniel stepped closer and lowered his voice. She's right. The best way to make sure people understand the truth is to tell it yourself. Vanessa thought for a moment. She had spent so much of her life staying quiet, avoiding trouble. But now she realized she had a voice, and people were listening. She straightened her shoulders. Okay, I'll talk. Lisa smiled warmly and opened her notebook. I promised to be fair and respectful. Vanessa took a deep breath and began. I came to the park today with my daughter, Mia. She loves feeding the ducks. It's something we do often. But today, 2 officers approached us. They started asking questions that didn't make sense. They treated us like we had done something wrong, even though we were just sitting peacefully. Lisa nodded as she wrote, How did that make you feel? Vanessa's voice wavered slightly, but she stayed strong. It was scary. I didn't know why they were questioning us. My daughter was confused. I felt powerless. Mia, listening closely, whispered, but then he helped us. She pointed at Daniel. Vanessa smiled softly. Yes, Daniel stood up for us. And then other people did too. I realized that we weren't alone. Lisa looked at Daniel. Why did you step in? Daniel shrugged. Because it was wrong. I saw what was happening, and I knew I couldn't stay silent. Lisa nodded. And now, the video has gone viral. People are demanding action. What do you hope happens next? Vanessa thought for a moment. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did. I want officers to be trained better, to understand that they can't treat people unfairly. I want real change. Lisa smiled. That's a powerful message. Just then, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and his eyes widened. Vanessa, the mayor's office just released a statement. They're launching a full investigation. Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Already? Daniel nodded, and the police department just announced that the 2 officers have been placed on temporary leave. A small murmur spread through the crowd as people checked their phones. A woman nearby said, Wow, that was fast. Another person added, See, speaking up makes a difference. Vanessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Change was happening. It wasn't just talk. Real action was being taken. Mia smiled brightly. Mommy, we did something important today. Vanessa hugged her daughter. Yes, baby, we did. As they stood in the park, surrounded by supportive strangers, Vanessa realized something. She had always been afraid of speaking out, afraid of drawing attention. But today, she had found her strength. And she knew that no matter what happened next, she would never stay silent again. The world had listened, and this was only the beginning.